Okay, so our goal today is going to be to talk about your mouth and your stomach, which are the first two big components of your digestive tract. Now, your digestive tract is not the same as your digestive system. When we talk about your digestive tract, we are talking about anywhere that food enters. There are some things that are part of your digestive system where food doesn't go inside of that structure. So we're talking about your digestive tract first, all of the places where food enters. Now, digestive tract is probably the most simple version of the name. Sometimes you might see it referred to as the GI tract, where G is the gastro part and I is intestinal. Gastro, or GAST, is what you see at the beginning of a lot of words that refer to your stomach. So it's your stomach and intestines. That's what we're talking about. In some of the older resources that I see, they call the alimentary canal. I won't call it that. But so that you know, these are all different names that I have seen for the same thing, the places that food enters. So we're starting by talking about your mouth. And if we consider what your mouth does, the first and most obvious thing that your mouth does is it allows you to ingest food. Now, ingestion is the first of the four processes of your digestive system. And like you would have seen in that video you watched on Friday, usually your mouth is the site of ingestion. Certainly there are exceptional cases where a person's mouth is damaged and food has to be inserted in a different way. If you've ever known someone to have a feeding tube, that could be an alternative way to get food in that's not through their mouth. Swallowing is part of that because if you don't swallow your food, then the food does not continue on through your digestive system. Ingestion and swallowing are voluntary. So you can control that that's happening. And I mention that because a lot of the other things that your digestive system does are involuntary. But this first part is certainly voluntary. You control it. You can control the muscles in your mouth. You can control the muscles that you used for swallowing. Now, does anyone have any questions about that, about ingestion? Another thing that your mouth accomplishes is physical digestion. There's a picture of your teeth here, but you do not have to be able to label your teeth or know the names of your teeth. This is just for you, for interest's sake. Two of the things that your mouth does to help with physical digestion, which remember is making the food be in smaller pieces, is that you have teeth. So teeth chew the food, or at least they should. So if you have ever had your mom or your grandma nag you to chew your food, biologically they're right. If you don't chew it, then physical digestion isn't happening. And if there's not enough physical digestion, it's really hard for chemical digestion to happen afterwards. So your teeth chew your food, break it into smaller pieces. Your saliva helps dissolve your food. Sometimes people think that this is a chemical process, but it's not. When something dissolves in water, that's a physical change. If I dissolve something in water, I could let the water evaporate and get that same thing back. And so saliva, which has water in it, helps to dissolve your food. Both of those things cause your food to be in smaller pieces, which is what physical digestion is. Now, your mouth also accomplishes chemical digestion. It also has to do with your saliva, but not in the same way. Water can accomplish hydrolysis. You know what this is, but maybe you need a reminder. It's one of the reactions that we talked about when we discussed the kinds of molecules and how we could break them apart. So in hydrolysis, water, H2O, is inserted to break a large molecule's bonds. So notice how my terminology shifted. I didn't say I was breaking the food into just smaller pieces. We're actually breaking the bonds, chemical bonds here, and that's the difference between chemical and physical digestion. Chemical digestion means I'm affecting the bonds in the molecule. Physical digestion means I have a chunk of food and now it's a smaller chunk of food. In addition, there is an enzyme. You will hear about a lot of enzymes, and once we have covered them all, we will make a nice chart to summarize them all. There are a lot of them. We aren't even going to talk about all of the enzymes, just a select few. So as you look through this and you're like, man, there's a lot of enzymes, recognize there are actually more. We're just not going to talk about all of them. You have an enzyme in your saliva called amylase. It's called salivary amylase because this enzyme is also produced somewhere else. But this enzyme breaks down carbs. So what is the enzyme doing? Realistically, it's speeding up the reaction, typically where water is accomplishing hydrolysis. Now, without this enzyme, chances are you will not have a significant hydrolysis reaction because the enzyme makes it much, much easier for the reaction to progress. Now, if you are interested in proving that you have an enzyme in your saliva, try this. Put a cracker in your mouth, let it dissolve, and it should start to taste sweet. The best ones are soda crackers, if you're interested. It takes a little while, though. It won't happen like in 10 seconds. If you leave it there for a couple of minutes, the enzyme should start working. If you don't have a ton of saliva in your mouth, like your mouth is dry, it won't work as well. The last thing, oh, whoops, sorry. I didn't want to go ahead there. The last thing that happens in your mouth is a little bit of absorption. And I didn't write it down because almost none of it happens. As we move through your digestive system, we're going to consider all four processes: ingestion, digestion, absorption, and egestion. The absorption question comes up sometimes. Can you absorb things through your mouth? And the answer is generally no. And here's why. If I look at what's going on in my mouth, did I break down any proteins or any fats in my mouth? No. How long does food usually stay in your mouth? You put a bite of food in your mouth, how long between when you put it in and you swallow? 0 seconds. Hopefully not 0 seconds. Maybe like a few seconds, maybe 5, maybe 10, depends what you're eating. But generally, there is not absorption because food is not broken down and it's not there long enough. Now, if we talk about your esophagus, the main thing that happens in your esophagus is something called peristalsis. Peristalsis is a word that people mispronounce with high frequency when they speak it out loud. If you were going to say use the word peristalsis in an assignment, please pronounce it correctly. You might have noticed, I don't know if any of you picked this up, in one of those samples I played you, they said paralysis instead of peristalsis, which changes the entire sense of what you're talking about. So this is a picture of peristalsis, and I'll just tell you what's happening. First of all, peristalsis involves smooth muscle contraction and relaxation. Since it's smooth muscle, are you in control of this? You are not. Smooth muscle is involuntary. So once food gets from your mouth to your esophagus, you are no longer in control of its movement. Now, if you look at the picture, we would say that your mouth is up here and your stomach is down here. So as we consider how food would move through this muscular tube, your esophagus. When there's a piece of food, the piece of food sometimes is called a bolus. I'm not going to ask you to define that term, but if you see it, that's what we're talking about, a chunk of food. So whatever this piece of food is that you've swallowed gets pushed through your esophagus by the muscles. If you notice here, above the food, it looks like it's kind of pinched in. And below the food, it looks a little more relaxed, like it's open. In peristalsis, the muscles above the food push it, and the muscles below the food relax to let it pass. If I could compare this to anything, it would be like squeezing toothpaste out of a toothpaste tube. The best way to do it is to push from the bottom, and then the toothpaste comes out the other side. If you try pushing from the top, it just pushes back down into the tube. This process will happen over and over again. So notice, this would be like, over time, what would be happening? Every time the piece of food gets pushed a bit further, a new muscle contraction and relaxation happens. Now, does anyone want to ask something about peristalsis? It's a fun word to say. Now, once we get into your stomach, the first thing you have to recognize is that your stomach is made out of muscles. The muscles, again, are smooth, which means that they are involuntary. People will regularly refer to your stomach as a biological blender. Because a lot actually happens there. A lot of people might incorrectly think that the only thing that your stomach has going for it is that it's full of acid, but it has muscles that slosh your food around and mix it up like a blender, which is part of the digestion process. Your stomach accomplishes both physical and chemical digestion, mainly of proteins. That's its main job. It helps digest or break down all food, but the digestion is focused really on proteins. So if something were to go wrong with your stomach, you would have a really hard time digesting proteins specifically. Now, the physical digestion really involves the muscles, so I don't have a ton more to say about that part. Chemical digestion always involves enzymes, and so we will talk about that a bit further. Before we do, though, I want to give you an idea of what your stomach has in terms of structures. If we consider where your stomach is, it's between your esophagus and then the first part of your small intestine. There are some valves right here and right here. You can tell that the tissue looks kind of pinched there. Valves can also be referred to as a sphincter. I usually call them valves, but that's another term that you might see. These valves are little bits of muscle. So instead of being arranged in like a long strip, it's like a little circular bit of muscle. When they are contracted, you see this tiny opening. When it's relaxed, you have a larger opening. So really, these are the entry and exit stomach bouncers, deciding when food gets in and gets out of the stomach. Now there are two valves. They both have names. The one at the top used to be called the cardiac valve, but lower esophageal or just esophageal valve is better. Cardiac valve because it's kind of close to where your heart is. Now I have a question. Has anyone ever suffered from heartburn? If you have ever suffered from heartburn, Man, does it hurt. I always tell people this story. I thought that I had had heartburn before, and then I was pregnant and I actually had heartburn and I thought I was going to die. It hurt so bad. And so I had made fun of my husband prior to that. He was like, "You're such a baby. Heartburn doesn't hurt that bad." I probably just had a bit of indigestion when I thought I had heartburn. Heartburn hurts. Does anyone know why heartburn hurts? What it is? What would cause you to have heartburn? Does anyone know if it has anything to do with your heart? It does not. Heartburn, really, we'll note here, is when this valve maybe doesn't work properly. Normally, it should stay contracted unless food is coming in. But if it's open or it's broken or it's damaged, food acid from your stomach might splash back up into your esophagus, and your esophagus is not built for acid. Your stomach is. Your stomach has lots of protection, but your esophagus is really delicate. So heartburn is when stomach acid goes up into the esophagus. It really hurts. It feels like your throat is on fire, which is where the burn part of heartburn came from. Maybe people thought that it was their heart because that's the position in your chest where you feel it, but it actually has nothing to do with your heart. The other valve, the pyloric valve, which is the one at the bottom of your stomach, its job is to control the exit. So ideally, that valve doesn't open until food has been properly physically and chemically digested in your stomach. If the pyloric valve is not functioning, diarrhea might be the result. When my brother was little, when he was a baby, he had something called pyloric stenosis. Essentially, his pyloric valve was broken. It didn't work. And my mom vividly remembers him just having diarrhea all day, every day, for an extended period of time. And what was happening was food was just moving straight through his stomach. It wasn't stopping off, getting digested. He would swallow things and it would just keep on moving, meaning it wasn't properly digested. So if it's not digested, you can't absorb it, and diarrhea is the result. Now, when we get to the bottom of the stomach and we ask ourselves, like this mixture that's leaving the stomach, what is it? It doesn't look like food anymore. It's called chyme. That is the mixture that leaves the stomach. Now, there's a lot of vocabulary words here. I generally don't ask you, like, what's the definition of this word? What's the definition of this word? But I'm going to use them. And I like for you to know what I'm talking about when I say them. But if you ever got to a point where you were trying to explain something and you could not remember the word, but you know what it is, always go with that. Always go with describing what it is. Now, that's not all that's going on with your stomach, but does anyone want to ask any questions there? Okay, I'm going to show you just one more thing, and it's this. Inside your stomach, this picture is a bit better for this. You have these little folds or wrinkles called your gastric rugae. Now, on your little diagram sheet, I don't think I put two different pictures of your stomach, but I wanted to pick one that really highlighted those wrinkles nicely. Those folds or wrinkles increase the surface area and they allow for stretching. Does anyone know what happens when your stomach can't stretch anymore? Say that louder because you're probably right. You can't eat more food. You are full and you will feel full. If your stomach is stretched and all of those rugae have stretched out, then you will not be able to put more food into your stomach. Generally, you would feel not well long before that actually happened, but that would be the point where you couldn't. The flip side of this is that there is technology to reduce stretching. Does anyone know why you would want to reduce your stomach's ability to stretch? Yeah? So you don't eat as much. So a lot of weight loss procedures would involve reducing somehow the capacity of your stomach to stretch. These would be surgical procedures, so this is not like a pill that you take or something that you drink. This would be an actual procedure that you would have, like stomach stapling or lap bands, and there's probably some new crazy thing that I haven't heard about. But there are lots of like surgical technologies that would reduce the stretching of your stomach or shrink your stomach to make you eat less, to make you lose weight. Now, I'm not advocating that any of you have these procedures. I'm just telling you that they exist. If you were interested in something like this, this is probably an area where there is constantly new research being done and new procedures. Make a great de facto if you were still debating what your topic is going to be.